Welcome everyone to the First Peoples Cultural Council's info session for the Braided Knowledge Grant. My name is Kim Jones and I'm a Senior Heritage Coordinator with FPCC and have been with the Heritage team since June 2020. Some of you might know me if you've had a Braided Knowledge Grant before. This is my fifth I've been managing the intake for 5 streams now. I grew up in Kitwanga in northwestern BC, and I have Gitxsan and British Canadian heritage. Today, I'm joining you from Vancouver on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I also have my colleagues Lucas, Natalie, and Gretchen here helping me out today. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat, and Natalie will help you. So the presentation portion of this webinar is intentionally short to leave lots of time for any questions you may have. And for the presentation, I am just going to turn my camera off and I will rejoin you for the Q&A. So in this presentation, I will provide an overview of the Braided Knowledge Grant, including what the grant is, project examples, who can apply, eligible costs, the grant timeline, how to apply, and key things to consider when applying. So what is a Braided Knowledge Grant? The Braided Knowledge Grant was developed collaboratively by FPCC's Language, Arts, and Heritage departments to support BC First Nation community projects that weave together languages, arts, and heritage. Typically, funding streams are categorized by each individual practice, but in Indigenous cultures, these practices are inseparable. This grant honors these interwoven connections and supports projects that align with Indigenous ways of knowing and being. Another important element of the Braided Knowledge Grant is the requirement for mentorship and apprenticeship that will help ensure the protection, transmission, and intergenerational knowledge transfer of BC First Nations languages, arts, and heritage. When applying, it is very important that you include all 4 components as part of your project proposal. Funding for the Braided Knowledge Grant is for amounts between $10,000 and $25,000, with funding made possible with support from the Indigenous Knowledge Holders Fund of RSF Social Finance. Some examples of past and potential projects that fit under this grant stream are projects that link public art, storytelling, and cultural teachings using the language, a place name project that incorporates language, cultural heritage, information, storytelling, and art, apprenticeships and mentorships between elders, knowledge keepers, and youth, for example, teaching carving techniques to youth, using keywords in the language, or teaching community members the art form of hide tanning using ancestral methods, documenting the process in the language, and using the hides to make regalia for cultural and community events. Projects that record language, songs, dances, heritage sites, and landscapes to share with youth and community members. Ethnobotany projects incorporating language, heritage, and arts, for example, growing a garden of traditional plants labeled with illustrated signs and the Indigenous names for those plants. These are just some project examples. Eligibility for this grant is very broad and allows for innovative and creative project proposals that weave together elements of arts, language, and cultural heritage. Please email us if you would like to discuss your project idea. Who can apply for this grant? Recognized BC First Nations bands or tribal councils, not-for-profit societies registered in BC in good standing and governed by BC First Nations individuals, where at least 75% of directors are members of recognized BC First Nations, urban and off-reserve BC First Nation organizations, where at least 75% of directors are members of recognized BC First Nations, BC First Nations-led museums or cultural spaces, where at least 75% of directors are members of recognized BC First Nations, BC First Nations schools or adult education centers operating in BC on First Nations lands. Please note that FPCC is unable to fund K-12 classroom activities or post-secondary accredited courses or tuition. Societies and organizations other than First Nations governments may be asked to provide documentation confirming their legal name and a list of the organization's current board of directors and governance structure. Additionally, societies may be asked to provide their certificate of registration, a copy of their bylaws and constitution, and proof of insurance. What costs are covered? Eligible expenses may include salaries and wages for roles specific to the proposed project, honoraria. We have standard rates for honoraria. Please check the funding guide for more details. Contractors and consultants may be hired if a project requires special skills. Administration costs, software and apps needed to achieve the project's objectives, meeting and event space rentals, materials and supplies, equipment rentals and purchases, food and hospitality, and travel and transportation. Please note that some of the budget categories are subject to maximum amounts, which are listed in the funding guide. Please pay special attention to these caps as you're completing your budget worksheet. What is the timeline for this grant? The deadline to apply is March 25th, 2025 by 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. If you require assistance with your application or would like feedback on your application, please email your request. And I will follow up with I will put my email address up in a minute. Please email your request by March 11th, 2025. Successful applicants will be notified in mid-May. Project activities can start on or after June 2nd, 2025. An interim report is due on November 28th, 2025. And projects must be completed with a final report submitted by May 29th, 2026. Project activities should not begin before successful applicants have been notified, as we cannot fund activities that occurred prior to grants being awarded. How can my organization apply? Applications are open on FPCC's grant portal until March 25th, 2025 at 4:30 p.m. Pacific time. The grant portal can be accessed at fpcc.smartsimple.ca. Please note you will need an account to apply for our grants. If you need support with your application, I can be reached at bkg@fpcc.ca or 250-652-5952, extension 122. Lastly, here are some key things to consider when applying. When filling out your application, please ensure you have completed each section as clearly and as thoroughly as possible. Applications will not be reviewed unless all necessary information is provided. Please include a clear and concise project description, an explanation of how your project weaves together languages, arts, and heritage, an explanation of how your project incorporates mentorship, apprenticeship, and intergenerational learning opportunities, a thorough work plan with key activities, expected outcomes, dates, and team members involved for each activity. Think about who your project team will be. There is a worksheet in the application to provide information on team members' project responsibilities and relevant skills and qualifications. A balanced project budget with detailed descriptions and cost breakdowns. Project costs must be direct and essential to the project and will be reviewed to determine whether they are reasonable and accurately estimated. Please note, the work plan, budget, and project team must all connect to each other. For example, if you enter basket weaving materials as a budget item, there should be an activity in your work plan for a basket weaving workshop or class. Similarly, if you list someone in the project or in the budget under salaries and wages, then that person should also be included in your project team worksheet. A description of possible project risks and the strategies you'll use to address them. For example, if the project lead can no longer manage the project, how will you ensure the project will continue? Letters demonstrating governance support from the First Nation or nonprofit organization applying. up to 2 letters of community support, depending whether the applicant is a First Nation government or a nonprofit organization. Letters of support differ slightly for each organization type. Please read the funding guide closely to determine the number and what types of support letters your application will require. All letters of support must be dated and signed. Proof of additional confirmed funding, if applicable. Quotes from contractors and consultants where the budgeted amounts exceed $1,000. And finally, a note about the review process. The peer review committee will be comprised of Indigenous languages, arts, and heritage experts, and they will assess proposals according to the program objectives and the feasibility of the project work plan, project team, and budget. You will only be assessed on questions asked in the application, so please ensure you answer all questions thoroughly. Thank you for listening to the presentation. We will now move into the Q&A, so please enter any general questions you have about the Braided Knowledge Grant into the chat box. We will try to answer questions in the order they're received, and if we run out of time, we will answer the questions in our Q&A document, which will be posted on the program page on our website. If you have questions specific to your project, please reach out to me by email at bkg@fpcc.ca or by phone at 250-652-5952, extension 122.